Welcome to Politics and Right. My name is Egberto, Willies, your host. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing today? We're going to have a great show for you today, folks. Who do we have here? Where are all my peeps? I see folks on, but I don't see them on. I see so far it's on Twitter mostly. Whoa, that's interesting. Did we not get our signals out? Let me check to see if once again we are being throttled. Let's see. All right, that information seemed to have just gone out, 3:03 p.m. Anyway, folks, we're going to have a great show for you today. It is Norman Reynolds is in the house. Norman from Katy, Texas. We also have in the house Eric Hayes from Kingwood, Atascocita. We have Melanie Keelan from Barcelona, Spain. We have Bridge MCP from Binghamton, New York. We have Paul Fleming from Powder Springs, Georgia. And we have, let's see, where is Michael Rudnan? He is always the first one there. Where is Yvette Avery Herod? She's always the second one here. Well, it seems like some people are missing. Sorry about that. Anyway, folks, we're going to have a great show for you today. How's everybody doing? Let's see. Eric, scores of firefighters from Lebanese armed group Hezbollah were seriously injured on Tuesday. That's sad. You know, what goes around comes around. That's all I got to say about that. We know that the Israel spy forces can find all kind of ingenious ways to kill. Let's hope, like I said, what goes around comes around. So they have to be careful now because it just may come around. This time they used beepers. Yep, beepers were used. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, I want to get a few more people here before I start the Thom Hartmann's video. So in the interim, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start the story, the other story that we are going to discuss here today. And that is how Trump judges are messing with our workers. How are they doing that? Alarm as Trump judge sides with company claiming NLRB is unconstitutional. That's the National Labor Relations Board. The National Labor Relations Board was prevented on Tuesday from moving forward with an unfair labor practice case against a social service tech company, Findhelp, after a Trump-appointed judge granted the Texas-based firm's request for a temporary injunction. Mark O'Connor, yes, this is live. In the Northern District of Texas, U.S. District Judge Mark Pittman, and I think that's the same guy who ruled against the abortion drug, right? Ruled in favor of Findhelp's claim that administration law judges at the NLRB have unconstitutional protection from being dismissed by the White House. Let's see. So he's speaking now in real time. Yes, I'm speaking in real time. Mark O'Connor, I am. And in fact, you can call if you will, 281-823-7747. I would take the call. All right. This argument has been, okay, let me tell you, Mark, just to be sure. What happens is the show is live at 3 p.m. Central and at 6 a.m. Central. I do a show that I simulcast on KPFT 90.1 FM Houston, 90.1 FM Houston at 6 in the mornings, every morning, Monday through Friday. And I do a live show Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Central. I do a rerun on shows at 6, and on the weekdays, I do a rerun of the show of the morning show at noon, and I do a rerun of this show at 9. I also, on the weekend, the 2 days of the weekend, run all 10 shows that we did during the week. And they run at 6 a.m., 12 p.m., 3 p.m., 6 p.m., and 9 p.m. We have the 9 a.m. slot open in the mornings of on Saturdays and Sundays. So far, we may throw something else in there. I'm not sure we may do that. All right, continuing. The argument has been used by other large companies, including billionaire Elon Musk, aerospace firm SpaceX, and a subsidiary of the fossil fuel giant Energy Transfer, which have both also obtained preliminary injunctions from Trump appointees in Texas, shielding them from labor rights cases. Again, that is given a lot of power to the companies and taking it away from the NLRB. Starbucks, Amazon, and Trader Joe's have also joined the corporate effort to strip the NLRB of its ability to carry out its duties as a federal agency tasked with protecting workers from unfair labor practices. The companies have claimed that the agency structure, which was established by the New Deal's National Labor Relations Act nearly a century ago, violates the president's removal powers under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Prior to the New Deal, judges claimed things like overtime and child labor rules were unconstitutional. Think about it. When we say that Project 2025 is real and will cause real damage to America, this is what we're talking about. Because Project 2025, that's the whole deal. Get rid of the NLRB. Make sure the NLRB has no powers to do what it needs to do, which means unions are in trouble and all those things are in trouble. All right. Lawyers for the NLRB argued that the Findhelp case that the company is not entitled to relief from a court until the president tries to remove the administrative law judge assigned to Findhelp's case. But Pittman said he was unpersuaded by the NLRB arguments. Pittman cited a precedent established by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, you know who that is, which ruled in 2022 that removal protections for the Securities and Exchange Commission judges were unconstitutional. In other words, they're saying these guys will always work at the threat of if the political system don't like something that they do, they're just thrown out. This month, 2 federal judges, one appointed by former President Barack Obama and one by President Joe Biden, have rejected other corporate challenges, claiming the NLRB unconstitutionally structured, teeing up a potential U.S. Supreme Court case to settle the matter in the future. Whoops. And you know who that Supreme Court belongs to. Tuesday's ruling comes 18 months after the official Office of Professional Employees International Union filed a complaint with the NLRB saying Findhelp has illegally fired and coerced workers who were involved in organizing their workplace. The employees had voted 95-52 in favor of joining the union. The NLRB protects Americans' right to unionize, fight unjust firings, and collectively bargain for their wages, said the U.S. Progressive Caucus. Without its employers can ignore labor laws and deprive workers of their rights. This is another move by the Trump-appointed judges in favor of wealthy corporations. That is the reason why Trump cannot win. Because all these protections that we've had over decades after decades will be erased by Project 2025. Because all these things that corporations say that they want, get rid of the NLRB, have as much money into politics as they want, all of that gone. All right. I think we have enough now that I'm going to start. Welcome aboard, Shakula Hairstylist. Mark Connor, welcome aboard. I think I saw somebody else as well. Norman Reynolds, I think I saluted you. Anyway, yeah, class war. I have been speaking about that for a long time. That's why I wrote this book. As I see it, class warfare, the only resort to right-wing doom. And I talk about how the patent system has screwed us. It is a book where you can learn in easy to understand terms how our economy has messed us up. And what's the answer? The answer is this: how to make America utopia, take away the economy from those who rigged it. So I wrote 2 books that handles that, folks. You can go to politicsandright.com/books and pick them up. That's a good way of supporting what we do here. Anyway, let's go ahead and get ready and listen to Brother You know who? Thom Hartmann. I had a great interview with him yesterday. E2247, welcome. You're kind of late, but welcome. And May Wood from Long Beach, California is here as well. Welcome aboard, May Wood. All right, let's go ahead and listen to our brother, Thom Hartmann. We had a great conversation. I think you guys are going to love it. Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. We are back again with a special guest, Thom Hartmann. Thom Hartmann is a New York Times best-selling author of over 30 books and the #1 progressive talk radio show host in America for more than a decade. His show airs on Sirius XM, radio stations nationwide, and Free Speech TV. His Hidden History series addresses critical topics like guns, healthcare, the Supreme Court, democracy, voting rights, among others. His latest books in the series, The Hidden History of the American Dream, The Demise of the Middle Class, and How to Rescue Our Future, explores this erosion. Good afternoon, Senor Thom Hartmann. How are you doing this afternoon?
Hey, Egberto. It's always great to be with one of the best talk show hosts in America. It's such an honor to be on your program. You do such great work.
Well, look, my brother, I appreciate that. I mean, I use you as my guiding light because, again, I don't think there's another progressive that first of all, that knows the material like you do, that knows the history like you do, and that's able to do what you've done. And I can tell you, for all of us that are doing this work, you are the guy that we actually look up to. But you have this new book that's out, and I tell you, first of all, I love the series that you're writing. Tell us a little bit about this series before we get into the book specifically.
Yeah, my wife Louise had this idea like 15 years ago, and we had at various times pitched it to different publishers. Back in the day, I'm forgetting the name of Noam Chomsky. Sorry about that.
Yeah, remember
back in the day, Noam Chomsky had this, had written these incredible giant books on political philosophy and linguistics and all kinds of stuff. But everybody knew Noam Chomsky was really smart, but nobody really ever had read his stuff. And so one of these small publishing companies said, will you let us excerpt this? And they created a collection of 6 or 8 books that were all like 100 pages, more or less, by Noam Chomsky. And those books are what catapulted Chomsky into fame, but also they're the books that got his ideas out there in a big way. And so Louise's suggestion was, she called them rainy day books, that, we needed to come up with a series of books that are, a book that you can read on a rainy afternoon, a book that you can read in one day. Ideally less than 150 pages, and ideally, it's a pocketbook size, small. Mm-hmm. And so I finally found a publisher that was willing to buy the idea, which is Barrett Kohler. And I wanted to do it around American history. And so this is the 10th book in the series, and each book addresses a different aspect of American history. We always start out with guns, and we go to the war on voting, and we go to the American oligarchy and monopolies, and the hidden history of American healthcare, Big Brother, the hidden history of neoliberalism, the hidden history of democracy. That was the last one. And then this one is the hidden history of the American dream. And in each one, I want to drill down, like typically back to the founding of the country, sometimes even a little before that, and then bring it out to today, and then talk about how we can get to the places that we'd like to be with each one of these topics. So what inspired you to do this particular one? Because I tell you what, it's coming out, I think it drops in October, correct? Yeah, it drops October, the first week of October.
Right. And I think it's apropos because, again, especially now, America needs to hear this story, So what inspired you to do it and release it right now?
Well, we wanted it out before the election. It's not soon enough before the election, I don't think, to play a big factor in it. But these are issues that are being discussed right now. And the simple fact is that part of the political appeal of Donald Trump was that he was willing to point out in 2016 when no other Republican would point it out, and frankly, Democrats didn't want to talk about it either, that the neoliberalism, free trade, austerity, tax cuts for the rich, neoliberalism, which had been embraced by, the parade got led by Reagan and Bush. They signed the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, created the GATT, which led to the World Trade Organization. They negotiated the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Bill Clinton signed it, but it was all written during the Bush administration, the first Bush administration. So this whole neoliberal idea was adopted by Reagan and Bush, but then Bill Clinton adopted it. The Democratic Party abandoned FDR and John Maynard Keynes's economics, and instead said, "Okay, we're going to go all in on Reaganomics and neoliberalism, with Hayek and company." And the result, and then Bill Clinton, and then George W. Bush, and then Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, all of them were embracing neoliberalism. But Trump was the first one to come out and say, we've got to reject at least some parts of this, specifically the free trade part of it. And he was right. He was absolutely right, that we do need to reject free trade. He did it in such a clumsy, ass backwards way, imposing these massive tariffs on China that he basically started a trade war. And that's not how you put tariffs into being, but tariffs are important. And it blew up in his face. I mean, it really hurt America and hurt him. But he said it out loud. He was willing to call out his own party. And then Joe Biden, he didn't campaign on it, but he has governed by rejecting, by and large, neoliberalism. And, now they're breaking up these big companies. We just had this trial about Google here in Portland. Mm-hmm. I guess it's still ongoing. And there's several other, giant companies that they're looking at breaking up and blocking mergers, the Albertsons, Kroger thing. And this is like a major turning point in history that nobody's paying attention to, that all has to do with the viability of what we call the American dream. That is a strong middle class. And so I thought, this is the perfect time to write a book about it.
Now, it's interesting that you brought up Reagan, but before we get into there, I just want to clarify something about tariffs, right? Mm-hmm. While tariffs, I believe, are essential if you want to keep a manufacturing base that isn't governed by, let's say, a cheap labor force overseas to protect your own labor force. Wouldn't you say that Trump did it in an unintellectual manner in the face that, let's say we go ahead and throw tariffs on clothes right now, given that we don't have a manufacturing base in let's say, textiles, etc., it's really a tax that would really hurt the middle class, given that, the rich don't care. They're going to get their Gucci and all that stuff anyway.
Yeah, by and large, at least the way Trump was doing it. I mean, keep in mind, we got on the tariff train in 1792. Mm-hmm. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton presented his 11-point plan for American manufacturers, sometimes referred to as the American Plan. And tariffs were the cornerstone of it. And, along with government subsidies for essential industries and building infrastructure like roads and things, and waterways, canals and things to transport goods. But tariffs were at the cornerstone of this. And tariffs became so important and as a way of bringing manufacturing to the United States. Up until the American Revolution, the British had laws in place that, like when George Washington was first inaugurated, or when General Knox rode up to his farm in Mount Vernon and said, you're now the president. Washington's number one request to General Knox, Henry Knox, was please go to Connecticut to this guy, Daniel Hinsdale, who's running an underground fine clothing store, and have a suit made for me that I can be inaugurated wearing American-made clothing, because it was illegal to make clothing in the United States outside of homespun.
Oh, wow.
You could not make fine clothing in the United States in 1776 or 1791. Well, by 1791 you could, but you couldn't at the time of the American Revolution. It was a felony. It was against the law to make weaponry. It was against the law to make anything, any kind of fine machinery. You couldn't make watches. You couldn't make. You could do clumsy things, but you couldn't do any of the fine stuff. It all had to be imported from England. And this was England's way of forcing the colonies to basically subsidize the British economy. So Washington asked Hamilton, how do we build an industrial economy here like England has over there? And tariffs were at the cornerstone of it. So from the George Washington administration until the Civil War, the revenue from tariffs funded 100% of the federal government, maybe 98%. Right. From the Civil War to World War I, tariffs funded 2/3 of the federal government. The average tariff in the United States from basically the late 1700s right up until the 1930s was around 25-30% in that neighborhood, depending on the goods.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then in Smoot, everybody says, "Oh my God, Smoot-Hawley made which was a 2% increase in tariffs, 31 to 33% overall." And then everybody's like, "Oh my God, that made the Great Depression so much worse." Now it's BS. It had nothing to do with the Great Depression. It arguably made the trade wars worse, but that but in any case, then when Reagan came into office, average tariffs are probably running 15 to 20, 25%. Again, it depends on the goods. We've got 22,000 tariff categories over on the Department of Commerce's website. And Reagan's contribution to this, the neoliberal contribution, was do away with the tariffs. So the big companies can just, and the result of that was that over the next 20 years, we lost 50,000 factories and 20 million mostly unionized manufacturing jobs. And China went from being one of the poorest third world countries in the world to having the wealth of a fully industrialized country. They're the second wealthiest country in the world right now. And on some days, they're right up there with us. And it's because our wealth got transferred to China. The way, when Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations, the wealth that he was talking about was the output of manufacturing. He makes the point that if you have a tree limb laying in the ground in the forest, it has no value, at least in human economic terms. But if you apply labor and tools to it, if you take a knife and you carve it into an axe handle, you've now got something that you can sell. It now has an intrinsic value. And that value becomes part of the wealth of the entire nation. Because even if you sell that axe handle to somebody in China, they're giving you money equal to its value, and that money is staying here. Countries that manufacture generate wealth. Countries that import manufacturers from other countries lose wealth. And that's why there's been this $40-50 trillion transfer of wealth out of the pockets of average working people over the last 40 years. Much of it ended up in the money bins of the top 1%, but most of it ended up in China. And that's what, so if you're going to reimpose tariffs, so we went from having, all these tariffs from 1792 right up until the 1980s. And then now we're down to an average tariff of around 2.1%, across the board. If you're going to bring those tariffs back and get back to 10, 15, 20%, which is what it's going to take to reindustrialize America, you have to do it gradually, you have to do it thoughtfully, and you have to do it out in the open. Because what you're doing when you impose a tariff is you're asking entrepreneurs and big businesses to build factories. And no company is going to say, "Oh, gee, look at that. There's a 15% tariff on T-shirts. I think I'll build a new T-shirt factory," if they don't know that tariff is going to be there for the next 20 years, because it's going to take them that long to amortize the cost of that factory.
Right.
So when Trump comes along and just slaps a 20% tariff on something coming from China, and everybody in American business is going, "Yeah, he did that as an executive action. The next president will just undo it. I'm not going to invest in a factory. That's crazy." You need to do it with Congress. You need to do it thoughtfully. You need to do it publicly. You need to do it transparently. And particularly in those cases where you're dealing with countries that can be damaged by our imposing tariffs, like, for example, Bangladesh and their clothing industry. You want to go into Bangladesh and help them make the transition to a healthy domestic economy so that they can wean themselves off the need to have an export-driven economy, which by and large is what South Korea and Japan have done over the last 25, 30 years. And, poorer countries, Malaysia, Bangladesh, like that, could do it with our help. But this is a comprehensive policy that needs to be done. It's called an industrial policy. And, that's what Joe Biden has been doing. He's been promoting one. He doesn't call it that. Right. Kamala Harris, unfortunately, doesn't talk about it on the campaign trail, and she really should, because in the
let me ask you this, though. Do you think she can?
Do I think she can what?
Do you think she can talk about it without it being demagogued by the other side?
I do. In fact, I think she's making a big mistake. The newsletter that I got today from the Financial Times, from Rana Foroohar, however you pronounce her name, is one of the most thoughtful newsletters. It's worth cost of the Financial Times subscription. And she points out that when Harris traveled in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, in each one of those states, when tariffs were brought up, she referred to them as sales taxes. And she's like, people in those states know damn well what a tariff is. And they know that when the tariffs went away, so did their factories. And they want those tariffs back. And she needs to start talking about tariffs. And she needs to talk about them in the context of an industrial policy, an intelligent, thoughtful, carefully done, multi-decade long industrial policy to reindustrialize America, instead of just, blowing them off as sales taxes. And I think she's absolutely right. In fact, that's the op-ed I'm writing this afternoon.
No, and actually, I consider that the thing about it is so, if you can't say something in 2 words or 3 words in our current way of thinking, in a large percentage of the Americans' way of thinking, it's amazing how things are demagogued. And that is my only concern. Look, I agree with absolutely what you said about tariff, etc. Though I do say that in as much as, and tell me if you agree with this, in as much as Donald Trump is the one that said, yeah, we need to bring on tariffs, his goal is really to raise money for the Treasury so that he can reduce income tax for the wealthy. That's my thought, but I don't know.
Could be. I mean, the simple reality is that when a tariff is done correctly, it doesn't generate any revenue, because, taxes have 2 purposes. One purpose is to raise revenue. The other purpose is to alter behavior. We give people a discount. We let them, ignore taxes on the income that they use to pay for their mortgage. Why? Right. Because we want them to buy houses. So the purpose of a tariff is to change the behavior of manufacturing companies in a country. And once they've changed that behavior, they're no longer importing goods and they're no longer paying tariffs.
Yeah, well, no, that I get that. It is interesting though, but you think through different levels of indirections that I don't think our former president does. And
I don't. But I do think people in the Midwest get this. I grew up in Michigan. I know people in the Midwest understand this. You don't have to explain this. I'm talking about your average factory worker. They understand this.
Well, maybe you need to send a detailed letter to the campaign, to the Harris campaign.
Well, hopefully that'll be my Hartmann report tomorrow.
Yeah, you have some time to do it, because and explained as it was explained here, but it has to be, in my opinion, it has to be done in a easy to understand manner, because it is so, everything is so demagogued here. It is amazing. But anyhow, you said, why do you actually think, when it comes to the Gen Zers, we know what us older folks have done, etc. A lot of the Gen Zers think there's no hope. What do you tell them? What does your book tell them?
Well, we're facing challenges, no doubt about it. Climate change is probably the most existential of them, although world peace is another one. The nuclear war could end human life just as quickly as probably much faster than climate change even. But that doesn't mean that there are not solutions. And I firmly believe, this is the other piece that I'm writing for Day After Tomorrow, that, I think that we need to revive the democratic peace theory. This idea that Francis Fukuyama was pushing in the late 1990s, that the neocons all, converged around, that democracies, generally speaking, don't go to war unnecessarily. The only time they go to war is in defense of themselves. And therefore, the more democracies you have in the world, the less war you're going to have in the world. And I think that's a solid notion, and it's something that deserves to be pursued. But the other thing I would say to young people is that, and for that reason, by the way, I think we need to be defending Ukraine, because, we need to defend democracies. But that, the other thing for young people is that if we can return to Keynesian economics, if we can go back to where we were before the Reagan Revolution, if we can go back to free college education, if we can go back to inexpensive healthcare, where hospitals and health insurance companies are required to be not-for-profit corporations, for example, as was the case in the 1970s. If we can reclaim some of those common sense things that we had for a long, long time in the United States, and we just really lost since the Reagan Revolution. If we can do those things, then we can really build a country and rebuild our middle class. Our middle class hit its peak at about 2/3 of us when Reagan came into office. And then he His job was to attack the middle class. I mean, that was literally what he was hired to do, was to take the middle class down a peg, because the intelligentsia, the Republican intelligentsia, felt that the women's movement, the civil rights movement, and the student anti-war movement were all the result of the middle class having too much wealth. Russell Kirk wrote about this in his book, The Conservative Mind, in 1951. And at first, all the Republicans, with the exception of Buckley and Goldwater, thought he was crazy. But then when the 60s happened, all the Republicans were like, yeah, he was absolutely right. He was a prophet. And this middle class thing got too big, and we've got to cut it down to size. And that was Reagan's mandate. And, from the GOP, and he took us from 2/3 of us being in the middle class to 43% of us right now. And that, and which is the American dream. And so that's, a large part of what my book is about, is how that happened, how we got into this terrible situation, how so many of us got left behind, why it takes two incomes right now to sustain a lifestyle that's about 20% lower in quality than what one income could do in 1980. And, how we get back, how we can rebuild the American dream, rebuild the American middle class.
Now, Thom, what is it? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear what you say. What is in it to really decimate the middle class? What's in it for the others? Is it a bigger piece of the pie for a smaller group?
I think there's two different cross currents that intersect of opinion and motive. You've got some really, really rich people who are afflicted with a severe form of obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, known as hoarding syndrome. Mm-hmm. These are people who, if they were not born to wealthy families or did not have some big lucky break in their lives, would be living in an apartment with floor to ceiling tin cans and newspapers. They literally have that hoarding problem. Yeah. But because they were wealthy or born into wealth or acquired wealth, their hoarding is largely limited to, money in the bank, 700-foot yachts, mansions around the world, and girlfriends. But it's still hoarding syndrome. And so for people with hoarding syndrome, there's literally never enough, no matter how much there is. So you've got the problem of those people demanding tax cuts because they want more of whatever they're earning, on the one hand. On the other hand, I think that you have people who, in the Republican Party, conservatives, who really and truly believed what Russell Kirk wrote in 1951. And, prior to the 1930s, there had never been any country in the world where more than half of its population had been in the middle class. It had literally never happened. Because when you have unregulated capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism, you end up with the world that Charles Dickens wrote about in Christmas Carol. You end up with a very small top 1%, basically the royal family and their buddies, right, big industrialists, a very small middle class, which are the doctors, the lawyers, and the small business people. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, Ebenezer Scrooge ran a one-man company with one employee. That was a small business, and he was the middle class in England at the time. And then you've got this huge, bottom 95, 96%, which are the working poor. And England maintained that with maximum wage laws. Right up until the end of the 19th century, it was against the law to pay somebody more than a certain amount. We have minimum wage laws. England had maximum wage laws to prevent the emergence of the middle class. Edmund Burke wrote about this in the 1790s. And in fact, the title of Russell Kirk's book is The Conservative Mind, from Burke to Eliot, from Edmund Burke to T.S. Eliot. And so he was agreeing with Edmund Burke that if a middle class gets too large, it'll produce social instability, for the simple reason that the average middle class person, the average working class person really, who does not have a college education and did not come from wealth and affluence and does not have a lineage that includes people who held political power, just doesn't know how to govern. And to turn governance over to this large middle class would be a disaster. This was, Burke's theory. It was Kirk's theory. And like I said, from 1951, when he first published that, until around 1965, with the exception of William Buckley and Barry Goldwater, nobody really took it seriously in the Republican Party. But in the mid 60s, when the civil rights movement hit in a big way, when the women's movement hit in a big way, and then the student anti-war, anti-Vietnam War movement hit in a big way, and we had cities on fire. We had students in the streets being shot at by the National Guard. You had women, just speaking out loudly in ways that had just shocked the sensibility of these Republicans. They all of a sudden said, "Yeah, Kirk was right. Now what do we do? Well, we've got to cut the middle class down to size." And that's what Reagan was elected to do. And that's what he did. The first thing he did was go after unions, because unions are the principal engine of the middle class. In his first month in office, he took down Patco, the professional.
I remember that well. Yeah, the airline pilots. Yeah. I mean, the air controllers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, he did that, and then he cut taxes on rich people and raised taxes 18 times on average working people. He put a tax on Social Security income. He changed the law to enforce the tax on tips. It just goes on and on, right? But the whole mission of the Reagan administration, the Reagan Revolution, was to take that middle class below 50% to produce social stability. Reagan himself talked about how he didn't think we should have free college in America because why should I pay those brats, his phrase, to engage their, quote, intellectual curiosity, end quote, when they, quote, oppose my policies, end quote. And so, when he came in as governor of California had a completely free education.
University, the UC system was
one of the best in the world.
Yeah.
And it was completely free. I had friends from Michigan who, instead of paying $200 a month or a semester to MSU, traveled out to California to go to college for free. And Reagan took that down, and then as president, one of the first things he did was he cut federal college education by 18%. In one of his first 2 years, and so it worked. Reagan did. So now we've got students $2 trillion in debt, and they're not protesting anymore like they used to because they're afraid of getting kicked out of school and ending up, saddled with debt for the rest of their life, which is exactly what Kirk and Reagan, wanted. You've got, a women's movement that is in crisis right now with these abortion laws and whatnot. The Republicans trying to put women back in their place. I mean, Kirk's point was, young people won't know their place. Minorities won't know their place. Women won't know their place. And in fact, Kirk talked at some length about how you have to have classes and orders in society for society to operate properly. And of course, white educated men are at the top of the class in his mind. And so, we're refighting that battle. We're still basically fighting against Reaganism. And that's one of the major themes of my book. Although nobody will talk about it in those terms, because most people don't know the damn history.
Well, I mean, every time I speak to you, there's so much that I learn about, and I think that is why it's so important and why it's so important to have these books. Before I go into homes as a commodity, I want to kind of prick your mind a little bit more with regards to the class system and billionaires, etc. Why is it that the people who do the work, we know that we do the work. The engineer knows that the intellect comes from them. The scientists know that the intellect comes from them. Why do we allow a rather not very smart group of billionaires to be the ones that control our economy, to be the ones that control our government, to be the ones? And what prevents us from saying, by the way, you couldn't really exist without us. You couldn't really be rich without us. What is it that's missing within our collective psyche that doesn't force that to be what we fight for?
I think the largest piece of this, Egberto, was 5, now it's 6 conservatives, Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court. They still believe what Russell Kirk wrote about. They still believe that you've got to have students terrified, that women need to know their place, that minorities should have a place in society that's below that of the majority. And that's why John Roberts gutted the Voting Rights Act. That's why they're going after your right to vote, in more general ways. That's why they said that billionaires and corporations can throw virtually unlimited amounts of money into political campaigns. They really believe, the argument that Kirk was making in his book, although he never used the word oligarchy to the best of my recollection. It's been a couple of years since I read his book, but the form of government basically that he was advocating was oligarchy, ruled by the rich, and a meritocracy. A meritocratic form of oligarchy. And I wrote about that, The Hidden History of Oligarchy, American Oligarchy. But basically, this is a classic case of, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, that so many of these guys who are promoting oligarchy like this, and particularly those on the Supreme Court, actually believe it's a more stable form of government than democracy. They don't genuinely believe in democracy. They're very skeptical of democracy. They often refer to it as mob rule and things like that. So anyway,
it seems like the mob need, in my humble opinion, maybe it's time for us to get a little mobbish, if you will, because the idea of a few billionaires who, look, I'm an engineer, you know what you do. And it behooves me that it behooves me that I hear about Elon Musk having a suborbital flight or a flight a couple of 100 miles above the Earth. And it's a great thing. I was working at NASA in the 90s when we put things out much further than that. But somehow he's doing a great thing because he's a billionaire. The silent folks that worked for Boeing Aerospace and Lockheed and all of that really did some work that he's built upon. Nothing is said about that.
Well, and he bought Tesla too. He didn't.
Right.
I mean, he's had some very successful acquisitions, and he started some things. I mean, as an entrepreneur, he's a smart guy. As a human being,
but what I always talk about is, when we define entrepreneur, right? I mean, as an entrepreneur, he's a smart guy. I usually say as a capitalist, he's a smart guy. Yeah. But but as far as producing something of value, debatable. But you actually said something that really whetted my taste buds. Homes as a commodity. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, in the couple minutes we've got left here, let's dig into that.
Yeah.
There are some things that I think should not be commodified, should not be treated as commodities. They should be treated as essential aspects of our nation, of our ability to function as people. I include education. I include healthcare in those categories. I include food in those categories, and housing. Many other countries protect housing. They don't allow foreign people to buy housing in their countries. They subsidize low-income housing. I mean, there's virtually, for example, in Singapore, which is not, an ideal democracy by any stretch, but in Singapore, there's basically no housing. There's no homelessness. I mean, if when there's more people, they build more houses. Yes, it's somewhat of a demand, top-down government, but when after the housing crisis in 2008, with the Great Bush crash. And we had all these homes on the marketplace, particularly those that were being foreclosed on by people like Steve Mnuchin, who, foreclosed on 30,000 families, I guess, threw them out of their houses. And suddenly there were all these cheap houses. I believe it was Goldman Sachs, it might have been JP Morgan Chase, issued a white paper on how housing could be the next great commodity, the next great investment, the next area that investors should be looking at. And what came out of that is several hedge funds and a couple of big investment houses started funds and started companies to specifically buy up single family homes across the United States for cash and turn them into rental properties. Mm-hmm. And in some towns, as much as 50% of all the single family homes in the community are now owned by these corporate landlords. And they collaborate with each other. They collude with each other. The Biden administration is talking about breaking this up. They've got this software program that's making it easy for them.
Yes.
And they end up jacking up prices. And so much of the housing affordability, I mean, there are 14 million empty homes in America right now. There are 700,000 homeless people in the United States. What do those numbers tell you? It's like there's something fundamentally wrong here.
Yes. Yeah.
Using houses as an investment. I get it. If when I was was coming up, I had some friends who, in our 20s and 30s, back in the 70s and 80s, you could make enough money to buy a house. Housing was cheap and salaries were good. And I had friends who, instead of buying a house and then selling it when they moved to the second house, they'd hang on to that first one, buy the second one, and rent out the first one. And several of those friends have done very well. They're not rich, but, they now have assets that are generating money for them. I have no problem with that. But when you've got a company coming into a town with a bag full of cash or cashier's checks representing $20 or $30 million and just buying houses sight unseen at auction, or buying them for cash the minute a house hits the market and pricing everybody else out of the market, you're messing with the lifeblood of a country. You're messing with the ability of people to have the American dream, frankly. And we need to outlaw this. We need to, and the way to do it is with tax policy. You just eliminate all tax breaks for anybody who owns more than, say, 4 houses, period. And then we also, I would argue that we need to adopt a law that says that if you are not a U.S. citizen and you own a housing property in the United States, you must live in it. And if you don't live in it, then you can't own it. It's just that simple. And, it can be your investment, but you got to live here. And,
exactly.
We would not be unique in that. And many of the developed countries of the world do this.
I mean, that sounds good. Look, what should I have? I mean, we're going to tell people how to get your book in a minute, but what should I have asked you that I didn't?
I can't think of anything. You're so good, Egberto.
Okay, well, I don't know about all of that, but let me just say, folks, the name of the book is The Hidden History of the American Dream, the Demise of the Middle Class and How to Rescue Our Future. All the links for the book will be accompanied in the book, in the video, and everywhere else. It drops on, I believe, October 8th, if I recall. It's a book like every one of Brother Hartmann's book that should be gotten. Like I said, every time he comes on the program, I get an education. And every time you listen to Thom, you get an education. If we could have more people on here like him, it would be great. Anyway, Thom, look, it's been my pleasure to have you once again on Politics Done Right. Anything you want to say before we close?
Thank you so much for having me with you, Egberto. It's always such a pleasure and an honor to hang out with you.
You have a wonderful rest of your day, my friend.
Thank you. You too.
All right, folks, that was Thom Hartmann. And, I really, really enjoyed that interview. Like I tell him, and I meant that from the depths of my heart. This guy is a bastion of knowledge. While I'm an activist, I'm an engineer turned activist. This guy is a scholar turned activist. He reads a lot. He knows a lot. There are a lot of times that he's talking, and I would be like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. You mean I have the concepts down, but I don't know the genesis of the concepts. He does. And that is so, it is always such a pleasure to speak to somebody that actually does the homework, reads that, again, like I tell people all the time, they're scientists and then they're engineers. In this field, I remain the engineer. He's the scientist. The scientists go into detail on particular subjects. The engineer takes what the scientists develop and spread it out there and create what's best with it. And I love Brother Thom for that. Anyway, as far as tariffs are concerned, I want to reiterate what he had to say because, I didn't do it as well as I should in the interview there, because Thom is right. We need to put our the reason we have to have these tariffs is to equalize the advantage that a cheap labor market has relative to us. If we don't do that, it will always be cheaper to manufacture overseas, and we kill the manufacturing base in the United States. And he made another point that, as opposed to Trump wants the tariffs not to build an American manufacturing base, but to collect taxes and reduce the taxes of the wealthy. In other words, because until we have a full policy, as a measured policy, as he explained, meaning it's not just about imposing a huge tariff. It's about making sure that Bangladesh, the people who supply all our T-shirts and whatever, that they as well, as we are transitioning back to manufacturing here, that they don't go into oblivion, that their economists don't fracture. It's a dual thing, and that's why he talks about it being gradual, not 20% immediately. That you go up as a percentage as you start building your manufacturing base, and you do it in a deterministic manner in such a way that we can start building our infrastructure, our economic factory-based infrastructure here. He laid it out perfectly. I trust that everybody got what he's saying. It wasn't a praise for, you heard the term, a clock is right twice a day. And, a dead clock is correct twice a day. And that is that's the deal with Trump. Do we need more tariffs? As it turns out, yes. Do we need it the way Trump is doing it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Let's see what we got here. Alistair in Dreams, welcome aboard. Two great minds right here. Think Eric learned anything? Eric has Eric has a gene that prohibits him from taking anything from increasing his. Yeah, it's Eric. You would notice Eric would just say the same things over and over. Bite inflation, tariffs way, those kind of things. Okay. But for those who want to learn, there's look, my program is for everybody, man. If you are interested in learning, you can come here and learn. And here's the thing as well. I learned too, like I said, talking to Thom, I always learn something when I bring him in for an interview, right? And I hope you do too. And that's why we do this. Tomorrow I'm going to be playing my the interview that I did on WAOK yesterday. Yesterday morning, WAOK had me on air with them. We'll have another thing there. Let me get back to right here. Put the chat back on this screen. Michael said, Egberto, that gene is called conservatism. Makes them stubborn to change and new information, especially if it contradicts your ingrained beliefs. I agree with that. Let's see. Our brother E2247 says wounded persons mostly die. This is no water, food, sanitation, gas station, healthcare. Surviving family in sufficient quantity to do much to die. I must have caught that in the middle. Alice in her dream says, need more affordable housing, tiny home community. I went and visited a friend who has a tiny home. And I'll tell you what, everything is so tiny, right? But if I were living alone, right, I think it's kind of funky. I saw a way to put this entire station in a tiny home. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty neat. And you can actually pull it with a trailer. I mean, with a regular car. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. A tiny home. Mainly says, I disagree. I wanted to send a $20 gift to my sister in Amsterdam and charge $75 to send it. I'm still pissed off. That is crazy. Egberto, I'd appreciate if you could sort out what the heck is going on with the pager explosion for tomorrow's show. It's nuts. It's an Israeli military act. That's what it is. I don't know who they bought the page from, but it was an infiltration. You know what? We always talk about having a timed thing. Nobody's going to admit to it, but they use pagers for more secure communication, between the fighters, etc. And Israel just gave them their supply, and they had a time bomb in there. Well, it's not time. I think it was activated by a code, but I'm pretty sure it was. Egberto, are you sure? Please look into it. Some details would be appreciated. I am going to look into it, but it seems like modus operandi, but I am going to look into it for more detail. Israel is hush-hush about it, but I'll try to figure it out on some foreign websites. Okay, we are at 57. We're at 57, which means I got to get out of here. But before I get out of here, I want to ask all of you to please support the show, those of you who have the wherewithal to do so. And how can you support this program? You can support this program by going to politicsdoneright.com/support, politicsdoneright.com/support. That is where you find all the different options to support the program. But I have a request for those who have the wherewithal to do so. I'd like to kindly ask all those who can to become paid subscribers of our newsletter. It's like providing a coffee a month so that we can continue doing this in a deterministic manner. And how do you do that? You go ahead and you go to politicsdoneright.com/newsletter, politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. Click on that and become a paid subscriber. I mean, you can get it for free, right? Most of the people who get it are for free, but I need about 2,000 paid subscribers. If we could get 2,000 paid subscribers, we could farm out some of the work, etc. But right now we are a fraction of that. So if you would go to politicsdoneright.com/newsletter, and for those of you who have the wherewithal to become a paid subscriber, that would help. Also, you can buy our books. Check out all our books at politicsdoneright.com/books. We make very little on it, but it helps. But again, please, so you can go to politicsdoneright.com/books to purchase our books online. But guess what? Anybody who gets our newsletter, who subscribe to our newsletter, have all access to all of our books that you can read online. And any subsequent book that I write, you actually get it. And I have three books that I'm writing as well right now. So please consider becoming a paid subscriber of our newsletter by going to politicsdoneright.com/newsletter and select the paid option. And again, you'll be able to read all of the books. And before I go, I probably should show you what that looks like. And so I'll go ahead and do that right this minute by doing it this way. When you go to our website, or rather when you go to, when you click on politicsdoneright.com/newsletter, first of all, this is what our website looks like. After you've subscribed, you can also go ahead and hit my books, and you can read all these books. As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relative Friends and Neighbors, and Tribulations from an Afro-Latino Caribbean Man, Racism Didn't Stop My Smile, Hope, or Journey Forward. You get a chance to read all of that once you become a paid subscriber. Again, that is how we can get things done. That is how we can continue doing what we do. So anyhow, I got to get out of here. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. Love you all. I am what? Out.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.